Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I will talk about common deficiencies for study sample reanalysis in pharmacokinetic bioequivalence studies submitted in ANDAS. Before I start, here's a disclaimer. This presentation only reflects my own view and should not be construed to represent FDA's views or policies. For the learning objectives for today, first, we're going to summarize common reasons, or sometimes the applicant may refer it to as codes, of study sample reanalysis in pharmacokinetic or PK studies. Next, we're going to understand common deficiencies for study sample reanalysis in PK studies. And lastly, we're going to identify ways to avoid some of these deficiencies. So study sample reanalysis are commonly observed in PK studies in ANDAS. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the summary table for reanalysis of study samples, which is to be submitted in Module 2. And additional information regarding the study sample reanalysis is to be provided in the bioanalytical report. And this bioanalytical report, as well as other supporting documentations and information, such as the SOPs, are to be submitted in Module 5. During our review, we noticed that many deficiencies related to the study sample reanalysis are common, and many of them can be avoided. So this presentation is to talk about the common deficiencies, as well as to identify ways to avoid them. Before I talk about the common deficiencies, I would like to first give you a few examples of common reasons or codes of study sample reanalysis. And actually, there's no unique name for common reasons or codes. For example, for internal standard variation, sometimes the applicant may refer it to as inconsistent internal standard error response, or very high or very low internal standard error response. But the general principle applies. In addition to the internal standard variation, another example of common reasons or codes of study sample reanalysis is incomplete analysis. For example, the applicant may refer it to as instrument malfunction, lost sample during analysis, or lost in process. Other examples of common reasons or code of study sample reanalysis are above upper limit of quantification or above ULOQ, poor chromatogram, PK repeat, positive predose, truncated calibration curve, or sometimes referred to as highest and or lowest standard did not meet the acceptance criteria, and also rejected runs. There are two categories for common deficiencies for study sample reanalysis. The first category is the general deficiencies, which are not specific to a repeat code. And the second category is the code-specific deficiencies. So let's talk about the general deficiencies first. One common general deficiency is regarding to the numerical raw data. We recommend you to provide the numerical raw data not only for the accepted runs, but also for the rejected runs. In addition, even if there is no study sample reanalysis, we still recommend you to provide the numerical raw data in your submission. Another general deficiency is regarding to the standard operating procedure or SOP. Sometimes the applicant may have multiple SOPs related to the study sample reanalysis. For example, they may have one SOP for the chromatogram acceptance criteria, a second SOP for the run acceptance criteria, and a third SOP for the repeat criteria for other repeat codes. And please make sure that you provide all these SOPs in your submission. Regarding the version of SOP to be provided, sometimes the applicant may provide a version that was current at the time of ANDA submission, but actually the version of SOP we would like you to provide is the version that was current at the time of study sample reanalysis. And please also provide the effective date of the SOP so that the reviewer could verify whether the version of SOP you provided was current at the time of study sample reanalysis. Sometimes the applicant may have the body of the SOP talking about the identification criteria for the repeat codes. And then they may have an appendix listing the guideline of how final values should be reported for these reanalyzed samples. But then in the submission, they only submit the body of the SOP, but not the appendix, which contains the guideline of final reporting criteria. So please make sure that all these information are provided in your submission. Another deficiency is related to the discrepancies in SOP. For example, the applicant may state in one part of the SOP saying that under this situation, the study sample should be reanalyzed, but then in another part of the SOP, they may state that under the same situation, the sample should be reinjected. So this may create confusion to the reviewer regarding how the sample should be handled, and this may lead to deficiency. And this example also ties to another point I would like to make, which is that please specify whether the rejected samples were reanalyzed or reinjected in the bioanalytical report. Another general deficiency is regarding inconsistencies between different documents. For example, in the study sample reanalysis summary table, the applicant may say that under code A, this sample from the test treatment group was repeated. But then, according to the study report, this sample is from the reference treatment group. Another example is that in the summary table, the applicant may say that the code A there are 10 samples repeated due to code A. But then in the bioanalytical report, where additional information is provided, only 9 samples were listed under code A. And this may create question to the reviewer about what happened to the other sample that was not reported in the bioanalytical report. Also, sometimes we see that in the bioanalytical report, the applicant stated that the sample was repeated and this repeated concentration was reported. But then in the SAS dataset, the sample is reported with another concentration. Another example of inconsistency is that in the bioanalytical report, the applicant stated that this sample was repeated due to code A. But when we check the data, we notice that this sample does not meet the repeat criteria of code A in the SOP, so this sample should not have been repeated. Another example is that the sample meets the repeat criteria per the SOP, but the sample was actually not reanalyzed. So all of these inconsistencies may lead to questions and which may lead to deficiencies. So we recommend that these documents accurately reflect what actually happened during the study sample reanalysis. So that's for the general deficiencies. And now let's move on to talk about the code-specific deficiencies. And during our review, we noticed that some repeat codes are more deficiency prone as compared to others. For example, deficiencies related to poor chromatograms are more frequently observed, whereas deficiencies related to truncated calibration curve are less common. So let's first talk about common deficiencies related to poor chromatograms. So we recommend you to provide not only the accepted chromatograms, but also the rejected chromatograms, so that a reviewer can verify whether these samples were rejected per the SOP. In addition, the chromatograms provided should be legible. And also sometimes the reviewer may ask the applicant to provide detailed reason per the pre-specified criteria in the SOP regarding why this sample was rejected. For incomplete analysis, as I mentioned earlier, examples of this include instrument malfunction and lost sample during analysis, and sometimes the applicant may refer to as lost during process. We recommend you to provide detailed reason or supporting documentation regarding the sample rejection and also sample reanalysis. In addition, the repeat criteria should be objectively and clearly defined in the SOP. For a sample concentration above ULOQ, we recommend that the reported sample concentration, the dilution factor used, as well as the dilution medium used, be supported by the dilution integrity data validated in the pre-study method validation. In addition, please also specify the dilution factor and dilution medium used in your bioanalytical report. Sometimes we see that the original sample was rejected due to its concentration above ULOQ, but when it was reanalyzed, after correcting for dilution factor, the reanalyzed study sample concentration was markedly lower than ULOQ, and sometimes the applicant may be asked to explain this observation. For PK repeat, which refers to, for example, a sample concentration does not fit with the expected profile, sometimes the applicant may report it as, for example, anonymous value, unexpected value, confirming value, investigational report, and sponsor requested sample reanalysis. Usually, we don't just take the face value of these reported reasons, and we'll look into the submission to decide whether this sample should be treated as PK repeat. And a common deficiency for this is that the repeat criteria is not predefined or not objective. For rejected runs, or sometimes referred to as batch repeat, batch failure, or failed runs, we recommend you to provide detailed reason or supporting information for run reinjection in your submission. And also, the run rejection criteria should be clearly and objectively predefined in the SOP. Also, for those runs that were rejected due to, for example, gradual deterioration in analyte and internal standard peak, or due to poor chromatograms, please also provide the chromatograms for these runs so that the reviewer could verify whether these runs were rejected per SOP. For internal standard variation, or sometimes referred to as inconsistent internal standard error response, or very high or very low internal standard error response, when there are a lot of internal standard variation samples, sometimes the reviewer may ask the applicant to provide a list of original internal standard response together with mean internal standard response of the respected run. For positive predose, or sometimes referred to as baseline value, if there are positive predose in period 1, sometimes the applicant may be asked to explain why there are presence of positive predose in period 1, especially with regard to their screening procedure. And as I mentioned earlier, deficiencies related to the truncated calibration curve are less common. In summary, study sample reanalysis is commonly observed, and it accounts for an important portion of the bioanalytical section in ANDAS. Deficiencies related to study sample reanalysis are commonly identified. And as you can see from my presentation, many of these deficiencies are common and can be avoided. For example, they can be avoided by providing more complete information, and also by clearly and objectively predefine the repeat criteria under each repeat code in the SOPs. So that's the end of the talk part of my presentation. And now let's move on to the quiz part. There are 2 quiz questions. Question number 1, which of the following statement is true? A, only accepted chromatograms need to be submitted. B, for samples reanalyzed due to concentration above ULOQ, dilution factor and dilution medium used should be specified in the bioanalytical report. C, if there is no study sample reanalysis, then raw data does not need to be submitted. D, study sample repeat criteria should all be specified in one SOP. So which is the correct answer? The correct answer is B. For samples reanalyzed due to concentration above ULQ, dilution factor and dilution medium used should be specified in the bioanalytical report. So for A, both the accepted and also the rejected chromatograms should be submitted in your submission. For C, if there is no study sample reanalysis, we still recommend you to provide the numerical raw data in your end of submission. And for D, the study sample repeat criteria can be specified in multiple SOPs, but we recommend you to provide all of these SOPs in your end of submission. So for quiz question number 2, which of the following statements is not true? A, the study sample reanalysis related SOPs provided should be the version current at the time of study sample reanalysis. B, the repeat criteria under each repeat code should be clearly and objectively predefined in the SOPs. C, for above ULOQ samples, the reported sample concentration should be supported by the dilution integrity validated in the pre-study method validation. And D, as long as I do not report a sample reanalysis as PK repeat in the end of submission, then it will never be considered as a PK repeat. So what is the answer? The answer is D. As long as I do not report a sample reanalysis as PK repeat in the end of submission, then it will never be considered as a PK repeat. This is incorrect because, as I mentioned in my presentation earlier, we don't usually just take the face value of the repeat reason as mentioned in the end of submission, but we look into the submission and to decide whether the sample should be considered as a PK repeat. So with that, I would like to acknowledge Dr. Rong Wang, Dr. Hisang Chang, Dr. Upam Mungshi, Dr. Bing Li, Dr. Ethan Steer, and Dr. Nilofer Temple from Office of Bioequivalence from OGD for their kind help with this topic. And this concludes my presentation. I will be back in the panel discussion if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much for listening.